Welcome, everybody. Today's episode, I thought I would show you some defensive stats and overall stats from around the league. I realized I hadn't been taking advantage of the team stats quite enough. So if you just go to team statistics and you make a filter, you start with anything, right? And you just make your own. So I did the export with like a ton of stuff on here. Essentially went through all the categories and made a lot of the fun stats there. So I'll show you on the next page and then just export it by hitting that and pasted it to here. So it's pretty simple, just copy and paste. Didn't really have to do too many formulas. So I just essentially color coded it and thought it'd be a cool way to rank everything and show you guys some numbers from the league. So if you look here, I'll sort by win percentage. So you see the best teams in the league at the top, and then you kind of go on the stats. I also added in, I thought it'd be kind of interesting, is at the top on the row number one for all these numbers above are the averages for all 32 teams. So I just aggregated it there. So if you wanted to just sort by like one conference or something, you can see the ranks averages for those conferences too. So essentially for right now, it's set up where it just takes the averages. So the average team so far this year in 152 games has 189 home runs. So anyone above that, it's above average, obviously. And all those stats right across the board, which is kind of neat. So if you look here, we have a league leading Montreal, so you can sort by like all the categories one by one. So you go Pittsburgh, like leads the league in doubles with 349. Last place has 200, so it's pretty significant. You have almost 140 something doubles differential between the top and the bottom there. The home runs, on average, teams hit just over one per game. You get 152 games played for most teams, 151, 190 home runs on average. So those top teams are hitting almost two a game, where the average is just over one. So Philly, Colorado, and that. Some of those stadium factors play a pretty large part, which I will get to at the end of this video too. We have it over here. Those stadium factor effects. So you get New York's hitting a ton of home runs, Montreal, Chicago, pretty much all playoff teams, or teams at least in the running for the playoffs, all the way down until you make your way down to Houston, Nashville. You get some of the fringe teams here. At the bottom of the league here, you get teams just over 100, so they're at about, you get hitting home runs in about 2/3 of their games, just over 65% for the bottom team there, and about close to 70% there for Seattle. So you get a pretty big differential there of a monster difference, actually, is 300 all the way to 105, which is pretty insane, top to bottom there. And so you see all those teams in the middle. So it really, a bunch of these offensive stats are pretty, you can tell, like really determine on team success, really important to hit home runs, obviously, with almost all these bottom teams here well out of the playoff race, all the way until you get San Francisco, which is the hardest stadium to hit home runs in. So that plays a factor. And then all these top teams are obviously teams like right near the top of the standings. Another thing is walk percentage, which is cool. So top to bottom here, you average 8.4% walk rate. So 8 out of 100 paid appearances, you get a walk in. The top of the league here is Colorado, which is pretty amazing because that doesn't, the walks really don't get factored in the Coors effect at all. Obviously, like, in real life, there'd be a little bit of like, you won't want to give them as many good pitches to hit in an offensive stadium, easier to drive them. Like, you get really nitpicky with that, but essentially, at the end of the day, it's not a big factor. So obviously, Colorado is just really good, not just getting help from their stadium. St. Louis near the top there. You get a big spread here also, almost double the walk rate. So you get 5.96 at the bottom. A bunch of teams in the sevens, and the top teams are at the 9 and 10s. So essentially get about 30-40% more walks from those top teams than the below average teams. The strikeout rate is kind of all over the place. It's pretty close though, from top to bottom. I guess I worded that wrong. Not really all over the place. Really, probably the most condensed one. 22.5% average for major leagues across the board. Guys strike out. So you have 45-50 avoid K. You're probably going to strike out about 22% of the time. The top teams, or actually this would be the bottom. So we'll sort by smallest. So the best teams in the league avoiding strikeouts would be Cleveland, Montreal, um, Los Angeles Dodgers. And by the way, before I get much farther, before I forget, the blue are all offensive stats, and then the orange here are pitching and defensive stats, just in case I forgot to mention that. So yeah, the worst team in the league for strikeouts is actually Atlanta and San Francisco, two playoff teams. So again, that's not a really big factor in as much of a factor as determining success as home runs and walk rate and other things, because obviously there's not a huge difference between a 20 and 25%. It's just a couple more batters out of 100 striking out, and they could just get out other ways, making contact and getting ground balls. So obviously the home run factor, you can tell the success correlates a lot more to wins and losses for the home runs than it does for the strikeout rate. But obviously still important. You don't want to strike out a ton, but doesn't factor in quite as big. The on base percentage is 31.8 is your league average. So just getting on base about just under a third of the time. The top teams are close to 35% on base percentage, which is pretty amazing. That is a significant number because that means you're like a third. Most teams like only have one or two players as high as like a 35 on base percentage. And so most teams average like a 290 or something. Probably shouldn't have this in a percentage, should I? Oh, that's fine, on base percentage, I guess. But I could do on base and do like the .300 thing. But I like the percentage number quite a bit too, I guess. So yeah, you get teams like Cleveland, Colorado, Montreal, the top offensive juggernauts, all AL teams there. Getting on base a ton, Milwaukee, Boston. You actually don't get an NL team all the way till number 8 here. Or 7 is Nashville. Down here, you get the Cubs. So yeah, you have a pretty big spread here from the top elite teams at 34% down to the average at like 31-30%. And you actually don't dip much below that, which is interesting. So if you take right in the middle of the pack out of 32 teams, right number like 16, 17 here, you're at right about 31%. And then the bottom teams are only 29%. So it's actually interesting to me how similar this on base percentage is. I thought there'd be, if I had to guess beforehand, I would have thought there'd be a lot more of a spread in that, which is interesting. Runs created per game, runs per game. You get 6 from the top teams here, 5.9, 5.9, 5.6, 5.5. The same culprits here, Colorado, Montreal, Cleveland, all the big bats there. You get a way bigger jump here than you do in the on-base percentage. So for the runs, which again is on-base percentage values, walks and singles as a big part of it. So obviously with the runs created, it gets more skewed because it's a little bit better stat. Kind of like the WOBA where it values the extra base hits, obviously, because you're not going to score runs without them. So you get those teams that are hitting more extra base hits. That's why I think there's more of a skew. So the bottom teams at 3 runs a game, 3.5 to 4 runs a game, all the way from the middle, about 4.8 down to 3.6, and then the top teams are in the 5s. So good number to know. WOBA also, you're going to get the same teams here pretty much as the runs scored. So it's pretty similar stat there. Same teams at the bottom, same teams at the top. The BABIP here is interesting. A lot of stadium effects in this. BABIP also is kind of skewed because if your team that hits a ton of home runs like Philly, it doesn't technically count as batted ball in play because you're hitting it out of the park, which is kind of interesting to me. Found that out from San Francisco Tyler. So it's really weird to see Philly at the bottom here, but that's just because the home runs are so hard. So on average, kind of a hard stat to get much by. But if you just look, the average team has about a 300 BABIP. Top teams are at about 320. Boston, a lot of this is stadium effects too. Like San Diego Stadium's really hard to hit in. And you get Seattle Stadium's hard to hit in, Miami, St. Louis. These are all pitchers' parks except for Cincinnati. And then you get a lot of these teams in the middle here. So it's really interesting stat from that perspective. WPA, it's not really luck because the good teams are going to have better hitters in positions to get, because essentially, like, you think of the word WPA, it's kind of like the high clutch situations, but it's not all luck, good and bad. Again, it's just like high leverage. So if you have a guy that most of your guys in your lineup are good hitters, like Montreal, you have 4 or 5 guys that are like 60, or like 60 contact, 50 power, like big time bats, compared to a team like mine or Cincinnati or the Mets. You're going to have a better player in the position to in the high leverage situation. So it's not like just because the number is high of WPA means you're lucky. There is some luck involved, but more so it's the same as I talked about before. It's more so like the teams with good offenses are going to be near the top. So it's the same teams at the top of the WPA here: Montreal, Colorado, Milwaukee, Cleveland. Pretty much been the top 5 for everything. But you do get some luck involved a little bit. So if you have a team near the middle, if you have a team that's like in the playoff runnings where they're well below average, there's definitely some luck in play there. But you get some just kind of cool stats if you want to peek at that. But I didn't look super hard at the WPA there. The WAR, you get a league leading offensive WAR from the same teams there at the top. The WAR at the bottom there is 0 for the Mets. That's a really bad offense this year. In line to get another pick. He's had a couple young guys play well, which is good to see. But between not having a lot of talent in that ballpark, it's hard to get much done offensively there for sure. Stolen bases, I thought was really interesting to look at. You have Juan Vasquez leading the way for the Dodgers and a couple center fielders with some juice there on the base pass. So you get 118 stolen bases out of them and a 78% clip. Minnesota's right at the top there too. Actually, just a little bit lower of a clip. Jonathan Clase probably stole a bunch there before he got traded. Atlanta's near the top. You get some real athleticisms with these teams. You get 5 teams over 100. The worst teams in the league, or the lowest, not the worst, sorry, the lowest stolen base total teams in the league are right at the bottom there, 28-30. You get some aging teams there in Colorado and the Cubs that have pretty good offenses, just don't steal a lot of bases. But you can kind of see the difference. You get about 70 extra bases a year. So I always look at it as a stolen base most of the time for first to second. So I always kind of think about it. It's like pretty impressive the difference between the value you're getting there with the Dodgers, where you're almost you're about 80, 90 higher than you are with the Cubs in Colorado. So that's like turning 70, 80 singles into doubles, which if you did that for an offensive player, pretty insane, significant difference with the value. So, and also not just a stolen base, but probably just in general means they're better base runners, more athletic. So it really helps out. It's just kind of interesting to see those teams at the top. The highest clip here, you get Atlanta at an 85% clip, which is incredible. 116 only been caught 20 times. Really good clip here out of the White Sox, Philly also. So those teams are really picking and choosing their times to steal, which is kind of cool. Teams at the bottom here about 60%. None of them steal a ton though. KC has quite a bit of attempts at 73, 67 out of Baltimore. So both me and KC aren't doing too well when it comes to probably trying to steal too many bases there. All right, and then we'll jump over to the average league. By the way, is about 72. So the average defensive and pitching stats. So it's kind of cool. I had some weird stats in here just because I'd never really looked at them before. Like batters faced. So you get 6,000 batters faced here from some of the teams at the bottom of the standings. Obviously, if your pitching's not as good, more guys on base, more batters faced compared to a good team that gets more outs. So you're going to have about 6,000 batters faced with a couple weeks left in the season. So I thought that was interesting to know just by the numbers. The main reason I want to see that is kind of the difference. So the league average 5,800 so far. There's a couple weeks of play left. Probably be about 50, close to 6,000 there. And so you get almost 500 batters face difference between the best teams in the league, pitching and defensive wise, compared to the lower end teams. So that's quite a bit of extra plate appearances there. 500, like that's pretty insane. That's like 500 divided by 30, right? Like that's what 20 or something. 20 times what I was getting at is, or sorry, I was doing my math wrong there. I was thinking how many times you go through the lineup more. So if you divide it by 9, so 500 divided by 9, that's a pretty freaking high number. So going through the lineup like 100 times more in the season, which is pretty crazy. Runs against, you get Texas there at about 550, and the bottom team's about 330. So pretty insane difference there. The bottom team at 332, a really good defense and pitching at San Francisco, led by Drew Jones in center field there, a couple of elite defenders. You have almost, 137 below the league average for runs allowed, which is pretty amazing. Top teams there about 100 over, so pretty elite defense out of Detroit, San Francisco, the Cubbies, and San Diego there. Some interesting teams at the bottom there. Good mix. Kind of cool to see. Who's left the most home runs in the league? The White Sox at 240. Right on their tails are Cincinnati and the Yankees. The Cincinnati Yankees stadium effects really come into play there. Really interesting there. You get some big time numbers there. And then at the bottom, you get 134, San Francisco again, run prevention, Atlanta, Boston, Milwaukee. So the top 4 teams there, all in the playoffs. The Angels are kind of fighting for it. Detroit's in so far. Montreal's in so far. So you really don't get a team until me. I've been pretty good with run prevention. I really like my movement pitchers, plus my ballpark's kind of anti-home run now that we've done the real life changes to the ballpark there. So yeah, you really get all playoff teams for the first 7 there. So that's interesting. I also added in my own stat here that wasn't in the game. I just took the numbers and divided by the home runs by batters faced, and so I got the percentages. So the best teams in the league only let up a home run in about 2.4% of plate appearances. And the league average is 3.2, and the worst teams are about 4. So I just thought that was interesting. About really is only about 1 more home run per 100 at bats, which seems kind of low, but that's really only the difference between the top team and the bottom team there. Well, 1.5, I guess, almost. So like 1.5 batters out of 100. So it's a pretty low number, I thought. The BABIP league average about 300. You get some of the best teams there about 270, 290. And the top teams, or sorry, that's not sorted, is it? Yeah, same teams though. So Milwaukee is actually, let's do a small list at the top. So the best BABIP in the league in Milwaukee, that's led by an incredible middle infield and an 80 range center fielder in Elijah Green, who's actually injured right now. But you get the 80 range at shortstop, 75, 80, and then you get 75 range second baseman. That is going to really help your defense there. So, and one of the best defensive catchers in the league. So the combination, big triangle there, catcher, shortstop, second, elite defenders at all three spots. The BABIP's just incredible. Tampa Bay is right behind them. They have Josh Wolverton at second base, who's 75 range, and a really good third baseman, Wander Franco, who's really rangy, and one of the best defensive first basemen is Vladdy Guerrero. So you can kind of see why these teams are at the top. The elite batting average balls in play there, 265, 272. And then you get Philly there with a really rangy shortstop in Poisson, and one of the best defensive third basemen in Revilla. And then you get San Francisco with a 70 range shortstop, big time rookie second baseman with 65 range, Mercado playing there second quite a bit, and then 80 Drew Jones in center field. And you get some really elite defenders, Pittsburgh, Ed Howard, and Pacheco in the middle. So just really interesting. You can really see how the middle of the field affects this number quite a bit with all those super elite teams having awesome defenses up the middle. Batted ball average, or sorry, based on balls, you get the walk rate there. The average is 8.4%. For league average, and so you get the pitching and defense. So the best pitching teams here would obviously be the lowest. So San Francisco, Cleveland, St. Louis. St. Louis. This is really just a control thing. Whatever teams have the highest control. I know St. Louis has like 3 or 4 pitchers like 65, 70 control. Dustin May and Fierro, and those guys all Jivotowski. So you can kind of see the difference there. Not much of a difference there. 10 to 7% would be the whole spread for the whole league, and averaging 8.5. That really is like if you have a pitcher with 50 control, they're going to get about 8 to 9% walk rate. So you can see these teams at the top, most of their pitchers have like 55, 60 control, and the starters obviously pitch a lot more innings, so the starters kind of skew it. So if you just kind of go through the teams and look at their control ratings for their top 5 starters, and these teams near the bottom have a bunch of guys probably with 55, 65 types, where teams near the bottom like me, I have like really bad control of my bullpen, especially I'm at like 9.3%. But yeah, not too much of a spread there. That's why I don't quite value control as highly as movement and stuff when it comes to the draft, stuff like that. The K rate here, kind of interesting. The really high K rate out of Montreal, they have just a ton of good pitchers with crazy high stuff. So they're just striking at 28% of guys. A big jump from anyone else. 25% for Cleveland comes in second. This isn't a big difference either. It is kind of like 28 to 20%, but what I meant by that is just kind of like every team after like number 8 here about 23, 24%, and then the bottom teams at about 20%. So it's really only a couple of percentage points difference, but there's like a pretty decent difference between 28, 25 at the top there and like 19, 20 at the bottom, but almost 10% difference there. So interesting there. The WPA, I won't really talk about that defensively. It's some luck there, probably a little bit. And like I talked about earlier for the offensive one, the pitching WAR here. The Montreal has about 30 pitching WAR. You get 29, 28. The average is about 18 there, and so you get quite a bit of teams in the deviation there from like 25 to like 14. Zone range here, it's kind of the same as the batting average balls in play. Same teams at the top here, so don't really have to talk about that. You get plus 47 out of Milwaukee from that infield I talked about. And then no one else is above plus 33, so pretty insane defense. Just as bad, unfortunately, the Mets have been really rough this year on defense. St. Louis, KC, some pretty weak defenses at the bottom there. Stolen base attempts. This is interesting. I kind of wanted to see this one of the main stats I wanted to look at. I went through myself and I looked at all the teams and I tried to figure out if there's some reasons that the teams had the most stolen base attempts at the top. I thought when I first looked at it, it would be really dependent on the pitcher hold ratings. But I noticed the teams at the top with a lot of stolen base attempts against didn't really have a lot of pitchers with low hold. They actually, if anything, it was almost the opposite. So I was pretty surprised by that. So I think more like a circumstantial. They just happen to play the teams that steal a lot more attempted stolen bases. Like Seattle, I guess, just plays a lot of games against the Dodgers in their conference there and stuff like that. That can kind of affect it a little bit that way. The catcher arms, same thing. I thought maybe the teams at the top would all have really weak catcher arms, but again, most of the catchers in the league are pretty close in arms. There's not many big arm catchers. There's most people have kind of factor in ability a lot more importantly. So if you look through the league, there's a ton of catchers with like 45 and 50 arms, and not too many guys with like 65, 70. It's very rare. So that also wasn't as much of a factor as I thought. So really just kind of uh, I think more so just depending on the teams you play, but there definitely is some minor factors. I think if you have a weak arm and a bunch of low hold pitchers, that's probably most of those teams near the top there. But you could dig into that yourself if you want to pause and kind of look through those teams and see if you can find any of that stuff. The last stuff here is going to be really fun. I was really excited to see this stuff. when I made this. The park factors, this is where it actually has this in the game, so I exported it and kind of sorted it. These are all color coded, so the top 10%, the bottom 10% are color coded. So the green, obviously, the top 10% for all these categories. I think it top 10% ends up being about 3 for each. So you get top 3 and bottom 3 for out of the 32 teams. So the most helpful offensive stadiums obviously are Coors and Philly at the top. A lot of people don't realize Philly's actually even more of a park factor home run wise than Colorado. Colorado's a lot higher when it comes to doubles, triples, and BABIP, but just pure home runs. Philly is pretty crazy. They're .21, so 21% more home runs from left-handed batters, and so I kind of worded this weird. It's left isn't left field, like left is left-handed batter, so that's to right field, and then home run versus right-handed batters. So I'll actually edit that after. Um, so I'm assuming like they'd be pull hitters, right? So yeah, it's like the Philly, the highest one here is 1.27, so 27% more home runs to right-hand batters, as in like they're hitting it to left field in Philly there, which is pretty crazy. 21% jump to the left field in Colorado, and then Cincinnati's really high. So these teams really hard to pitch in. At the bottom there, you see the bottom 4 teams 0.74, 0.79, so they're about 20 to 25% less home runs than the league average. The ones to the left-handed batters hitting bombs out to right field there, you'll see that the league leaders Colorado and the White Sox are actually way higher than I realized. That's why it's fun doing this stuff. I didn't realize the White Sox stadium was so much easier to hit home runs to right field there. Philly, Cincinnati, kind of the same culprits at the top there. The Yankees, Washington, all the offensive stadiums. The Dodgers a little higher than I thought, which is interesting. The Angels, Toronto's kind of high there. And then at the bottom here, you see about 20% less for Boston, San Diego, Miami, and then a substantially lower number. I think because of the win factor in that stadium in San Francisco, there are 41% less home runs to right field there. So don't really get nicked a ton by left-handed power in the San Francisco stadium. That's why the offensive number is a little bit lower sometimes for San Francisco's teams now in the park. But the pitch, it kind of makes up for it with the pitching. The last thing I want to look at here is these defensive stats. So you get the percentages, which is cool, the biz stats. So the biz routine plays, you get the top 3 teams here, about 94.5%. Cincinnati, San Francisco, and Colorado. Cincinnati right at the top here, pretty good routine plays defensively. The spread here, the league average 93.3, so not really worth talking too much about. Everything's really close. 94, 92 is pretty amazing short spread there. But you start to get a little bit bigger spreads here when you get to these other stats. So the likely plays, the top here, San Francisco, Colorado, New York, Pittsburgh, some of the best defense in the league. And again, I didn't realize how good Cincinnati's defense has been, kind of near the top here in a few stats. At the bottom here, I am the worst in the entire league in likely plays. My infield is not great, and my corner outfield is pretty weak. Center field, I've actually been pretty bad defensively, so I'm really not too good at very many spots defensively. So it makes sense why I'm at the bottom there. The White Sox, Mets, St. Louis, Toronto, kind of near the bottom. A little bit more of a spread. You only have like 2% spread here, but in the likely plays, you go from 72 to 60, so that's a 12% difference. Pretty insane. And then you get the even plays. The league average I thought would have been 50 for this, so I thought it was kind of interesting. It's only at 47, but the top team, Milwaukee. So the even plays, for whatever reason, they're just so high. Obviously, it has something to do with the rangy players, the really good middle of the field guys they have. I guess just making it to more even balls easier, or having strong arms, and just I don't know if that's more of a range thing or an arm thing, or they combine it a little bit. But you get 2 teams at the top here with like 75, 80 range shortstops, Poisson and Preciado, so pretty interesting. Tampa Bay, Cleveland, same teams at the top here. They're pretty good defensively. Crazy spread here. This is one of the biggest ones we've seen yet. You get 57% at the top, down to the bottom teams. A ton of teams at the low 40s, and you get someone as low as 37 for Kansas City. So pretty fascinating that Kansas City only makes 37% of even plays, where Milwaukee makes 57%. So that's just unbelievable difference. Staggering difference. The unlikely plays, you get Milwaukee at the top again. Elite defense, 36, 37% for these top teams here. Boston's defense is awesome. We'll talk about that in a second. New York at the top here. So this one you get 37 to 24. So you just, it's still a pretty big number, almost really like a 25% or something like that, right? But big difference. But you get quite a bit of teams in the middle there that are really similar. So you go right from 32 to 28. There's a ton of teams there in that range. But yeah, 37 to 24 is a pretty substantial difference also. The airs, you get teams, I actually did this wrong. I'll have to flip that after. The green should be at the top here. But yeah, the best defense in the league, least amount of errors, Colorado, which is pretty amazing because their field a lot more space to make errors. So that's amazing that they're first. Really good. Royce Lewis and Amador in the middle of the field there, both awesome defenders. Really good defenders all across the board. Victor Robels, who's been injured for quite a while, he's really good in center field. Just a ton of good defenders there. Houston, surprised to see up this high, so been pretty good glove defenders there. And then, yeah, at the bottom here, you see Minnesota with 111 errors. Pretty shocking to see Milwaukee. Although you do get some more errors when you have really high range guys, because I think they can make it to some more balls, which they end up fiddling, where maybe like a 60 range shortstop wouldn't have made it to than 80 range does. But then once he gets to it, the 80 range guy kind of bumbles it or makes a bad throw. So I think there's a little bit more opportunities to get errors. But still, it's really interesting to see Milwaukee second worst in the league when it comes to error total, and 40 more errors than Colorado, a team they're fighting for in the standings. So that's pretty interesting difference to me. The other thing I was interested in was these double play numbers in totals. The top teams induce about 150 double plays on the season, Atlanta, and then you get 135 here for a bunch of teams, Washington, Colorado, San Diego. That's really few. That doesn't seem right to me. I don't know if the game's not counting like certain things, like they're only counting the ones that don't touch the ground or some skew, but it doesn't make sense. There'd be more than one ground ball double play a game for sure in real life. I would imagine there'd be like triple. I don't know the exact numbers, but that doesn't make any sense. Anyone who watch baseball knows there's usually a ton of like double plays. Like these bottom teams, only 91 double plays out of like 150 games. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think something's wrong in the way they calculate double plays. I don't understand exactly, but everything else has looked good. But that number just seems really off to me. So I'm not too sure if anyone has any thoughts on that. Just toss me a DM or leave a comment on the video. And then the pass balls here. The again, I've color coded this wrong. The lowest number should be green actually for this. The St. Louis Cardinals only have 4 pass balls on the season, and I just thought this was interesting because I thought maybe the best catchers would be a huge factor in this, but I think when I looked at it, it was actually more correlated to the control. The teams, like St. Louis had like a ton of pitchers like really high control, like Dustin May and Fiera, like I mentioned earlier, near the top of the league in least amount of walks. So I think it might have something to do with the teams get more that have a lot of wild pitchers with really high stuff and low control, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I was pretty surprised though. It's pretty insane difference. The top team there only allowing 4 pass balls on the season, and the bottom team at 25. So pretty radical difference there. Most teams averaging 13. So that's pretty big jump there between the top and the bottom. So I thought that was another stat that you guys might find neat. So that's pretty much everything. You can pause the screen if you want at any point and see any stat you want. And yeah, like I said, it's really easy to make a table like this. You really just, it's a lot of just copy and pasting, and you just I didn't even really make any formulas for this. I made like some minor ones, but essentially it was just like the formulas at the end here, but essentially it was literally just copy paste and paste it, and like I said, just color code it by highlighting everything and conditional formatting and saying like sort in any way you want. Just hit these things: highest green, lowest red, and you just, that's all you have to do. So pretty fun to look at those stats personally. So hope you guys enjoyed. Cheers.